Hey everyone, I'm professional photographer Ian Plant, and my goal, my mission in life is to help you become the best photographer that you can be. And joining me today in that mission is an excellent photographer, and she's also a great photo educator, and she is one of my favorite people on the planet. I always enjoy talking with her, and I know you will as well. Sarah Marino, welcome to Photo Talk.
Thanks so much for having me, Ian. I'm really glad to participate in one of these interviews.
Well, I prefer to call them conversations instead of interviews, so I'm glad that you could join me for this conversation, and I'm really proud of myself that I nailed that introduction in just one take. Nice
work. Really nice work.
I don't get a chance to praise myself for much, so when the opportunity arises, I jump at it.
Go for it.
So I usually like to start off by giving the photographer who I'm having a conversation with a chance to introduce herself. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about your background, specifically how you got into photography in the first place and how you became a professional photographer.
Well, I've been doing landscape and nature photography for about 10 years now, and I got started with this pursuit mostly because I was in a super stressful job. I was leading a big program at a nonprofit organization and going to graduate school full-time, and was just super, super stressed out. So I started hiking as much as I could just to relax a little bit more, started taking along a camera, and found that process to be really meditative and one of the only things that was really clearing my mind. So that is the start of what became an obsession. And I really spent all my spare time hiking, being outside, and really trying to improve my photography. And then that profession, I continued in that profession until just last December when I wrapped up my consulting business. I had been working with foundations and nonprofits for years and decided that I was ready to jump full-time into photography. So as of January, I'm now focused almost entirely on photography, writing about photography, teaching about photography, being outside. I'm really fortunate to have the situation where I can be living part-time in a beautiful community at the base of the San Juan Mountains in southwestern Colorado, or living part-time in our Airstream trailer. My husband, Ron Cascarosa, who is also a nature photographer, has a fully remote job. So we have a lot of flexibility and are really fortunate to be able to spend a lot of time outside, both just hiking, enjoying nature, and then also spending a lot of time on nature photography.
And definitely, I'm going to have Ron on the program at some time in the future as well. So those of you who do not know already that Ron and Sarah are nature photography's power couple, that's who they are. So they're both excellent photographers, and they're both really great people, and I have a lot of fun. I always get a big kick out of hanging out with Ron and Sarah. And, it's funny because if I think of you guys as a buddy cop movie, Sarah, you seem to be like the by-the-book organized cop, and Ron is the comic relief. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's absolutely fair. When you said something about potentially talking to Ron, my first reaction is his conversation with you will be much funnier than my conversation with you. I'm definitely the more serious, practical, organized, like all the things that you mentioned. But looking back at myself 10 years ago and some of my professional photos where I'm in a complete buttoned up suit and just like wearing high heels and going to all these meetings and that kind of thing, I don't recognize that person anymore. So I'm a lot less serious than I used to be. And nature photography has done that for me.
And, that raises a really interesting question because, a lot of folks know about my background. I used to be a lawyer. I was a lawyer for 8 years in a big Washington, D.C. law firm. So I was part of that same button-down community that you're talking about right now. And I've always been a very analytical thinker. I mean, a lot of people don't think that I could possibly have been a lawyer because I seem like such a complete and total screw up. But I had a serious job, and I've always struggled because I'm very analytical in my approach to photography and art and composition, and I've always struggled with the creative process because I feel like there's that whole left brain, right brain divide. And those of us who have the analytical brains, I think, can sometimes find artistic endeavors a bit more challenging than those folks who have got that artistic, creative brain, and they seem to do it intuitively. So how do you feel about this? Do you feel that your organized analytical side gets in the way of your artistic pursuits, or do you think that it actually is your superpower? It's your secret weapon for making great photographs?
Well, I think from a business perspective, I think it definitely helps because I've owned a small business for 10 years now. And I think that a lot of my skills related to my more analytical side of my personality is what has really helped me be successful on the business side of photography. So in that sense, I think it's been really helpful. I think with the creative side of photography, I do think that that's a place where I've had to be a lot more open to experimentation than I ever have been in other parts of my life where I prefer a lot more control, like releasing control, trying to be less of a perfectionist. Like I was just thinking recently about one part of my photography portfolio that has helped me deal a lot with that perfectionism. Just working with shallow depth of field on plants is an example of where a lot of those scenes, there's a lot of imperfections when you get really close to subjects in nature, and accepting some of those imperfections has helped me, I think, embrace just more experimentation and trying to let loose or let go of some of the control that has come along with the part of my personality that I think made me a really good consultant, but sometimes gets in my way of being as creative as I potentially could be. So I think it's just been a process for me where I've tried a lot of different things. I've been a lot more open to failure, just so that I think I'm just opening myself up to more opportunities to be a little bit more creative than I might have been when I first started out as a nature photographer. I've always been interested in hobbies and crafts and that sort of thing. So I think that I've been naturally inclined to have both the left brain, right brain mix, but I do feel like the more analytical side comes a little bit more naturally. So how about you? Since it sounds like we have some similar personality attributes, what do you think are some of the things that have helped you or that you've tried over the years?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting because I look at your portfolio and I look at mine and I see that both of us are attracted to a fair amount of symmetry and pattern and order in our compositions. I think that, I was looking through your portfolio and there's a lot of intimate shots that are pattern shots. And I see in you the same need that I have to kind of organize the world in a neat and tidy way. And I find that when I'm making photographs, the thing I have to do after I set up my composition is step back and say, okay, I've got the symmetrical part of this down. And now I need to figure out a way to introduce some asymmetry to kind of mix things up a bit to make it less perfect. And for me, it's a step that I have to force myself to take. And I find that other photographers just kind of get there intuitively and find their way to that energetic, dynamic, asymmetrical composition in a way that I find to be challenging. And so I suspect that you and I are kind of in the same boat that way.
I do. I agree with pretty much everything you said. Like, I think the way that you characterized my work is very accurate. I think one of the things that I have been trying to do, though, is just accept that that's who I am as a photographer and that I'm happy with my work. I feel like there are some places that I could improve and some things that I wish I did differently, and I'm working on some of those things. But I also have stopped trying to be someone that I'm not. I, for years, was trying to follow the path that I thought was the path, like the style that was most popular or that received the most attention from an online audience. And I've realized that that's not who I am, and it's not what makes me happy. So just accepting who I am and appreciating the fact that I do have a unique view on the world and that that's just as valid as any other perspective has really been helpful for me to just say, like, I like order and I like organizing the chaos of nature, and that I find that those are the scenes that attract me most, and that I'm going to spend a lot of my time doing those things. I probably do need to spend a little bit more time stretching myself in other directions, and I have tried to do that over the last 6 months or a year. And I think I've enjoyed both, like really embracing who I am as a photographer, but then still trying to kind of stretch myself to try some new things.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, the way you phrased it, just embracing who you are and kind of running with it. And I think that that is definitely a very good idea for people who are still exploring their artistic vision, to be okay with what they like to do, to not always try to be like everyone else. And part of that for you seems to have been an embrace of intimate shots. Like, I know that you're very good at doing the wide sweeping landscape, but where I see much of your focus and where I see a lot of your talent and ability being aimed at is at the intimate landscape instead. So talk more about that, please.
Yeah, I feel like over the last, say, 3 or 4 years, just trying to figure out the stories that I'm trying to tell about nature, that when I think about my personal style and my vision for my work and what really gets me excited and inspired when I'm outside is a really broad range of subjects. So I talk about my photography as being an expansive pursuit. And what I mean by that is that I'm fascinated from the biggest, boldest grand landscapes to the tiniest little things that most people walk by. So that means that my portfolio is fairly diverse in terms of subject matter, but that a lot of my time is focused on the smaller details. And I think one of the reasons that I have been doing more of that is that just once I slowed down and started spending a lot of time just learning about nature and visually exploring, trying to identify more opportunities for photography, I just started noticing so much diversity of subject matter that I wanted to start photographing some of those smaller details. So once I figured out that that was an interest of mine, I've just spent a lot of time doing it. I think a great example is that I've visited the Pacific Northwest many, many times. And up until this last trip, I had never realized how many mushrooms are growing, especially in the wet season. And it's like, how did I not notice that before? And it's just the fact that now I'm more curious. I see more potential things to photograph. And that curiosity has led me to have an interest in things like big, bold, black and white landscapes or color landscapes, or kind of the mid-range telephoto scenes of things like forests and sand dunes and that kind of thing, all the way down to the tiniest little details. So I really see it as part of how I see the world, how I like telling stories, that I just like a really diverse range of subjects.
And it seems like really it's a quest to find something beautiful in what might otherwise be considered mundane by other people, something that might be completely overlooked. And I think it's a testament to the power of photography that, you know, you as the photographer can transform these ordinary overlooked subjects and make them something powerful and artistic that other people would look at and say, oh, wow, I never would have thought of photographing that.
Yeah. And I have that experience a lot when I'm teaching workshops of helping people have that aha moment when they start seeing a lot of those little details in nature. I think it increases their curiosity and their fascination with what they're seeing, and then helps in terms of identifying opportunities. It's like, well, if it's clear skies and there aren't grand landscapes to photograph, I have all these other things that I could do. So when I talk about an expansive pursuit, it means I don't like just photographing when there's colorful clouds in the sky during a half an hour each morning and evening, that there's so much more to nature, and that by seeing a lot of different types of landscapes and nature subjects, that just increases the opportunity for photography throughout the day and my ability to tell a more diverse story about all of the places that I visit.
Well, I like the way that you put that. I'm one of those early morning, late in the evening photographers waiting for those great clouds. And then as soon as the sunrise is done, I go back to my hotel and take a nap. And I think that there's a lot more out there to be seen. And I'm glad that you're able to go out there and find it and embrace it in a way that I never have been able to do. And you've been to a lot of really beautiful places. Obviously, the search for the intimate nature shot, you don't really need to be going to the stand-up, beautiful scenic places. I know you've done a lot of photography in the Mountain West and the Desert Southwest and the Pacific Northwest, and you've done a lot of photography in Iceland. Are there other areas you really enjoy going to make photographs?
I think you pretty much summed up the places that I enjoy the most. I live near the San Juan Mountains in Colorado, so that's one of the places that really inspires me. And then the Mojave Desert would probably be my second favorite place. But my philosophy on landscape photography is that I could go out in my yard right now and I could take 10 photos that I'm happy with. So it's March and I live at 7,000 feet, so there's not a lot growing, but I still feel like I could find things that interest me. and that especially with plants. And then I also do have nice mountain views, but that still requires interesting weather. And I'll just give an example of why I feel like I'm a lot happier pursuing this kind of nature photography is we were just in Death Valley for a month, and we had pretty much 1 or 2 days with interesting clouds in the sky. So I was there because I was there for work and had some other commitments. I was teaching a workshop and needed to be there. So it wasn't like I could move on to some place where there was more interesting weather. But I still feel like I came back with a lot of photos that I really like. So just this more expansive view for me of what nature photography is just makes me a lot happier than when I felt really dependent on the weather, because you can, like I said, you can be in a place for a month and just not have much happening.
So what would you do in Death Valley in the middle of the day when it's bright and sunny out? Like, what might be an example of the types of photography you would engage in?
So a great example of our time in Death Valley was we have now hiked to 20 canyons in Death Valley National Park. A lot of people don't think of Death Valley as being a place that's full of canyons, but there are many, many canyons in the park. We feel like we've hiked to 20, which you would say in most places that's impressive. In Death Valley, we've barely scratched the surface. So there are a couple that are pretty accessible, but then there are a lot that are very off the beaten path. Some of them have marble walls that have beautiful reflected light. Others are conglomerate, which tell a much different geologic story about the park, but they all have this beautiful light during the middle of the day. So that's a great example of a time or a middle of the day type of photography opportunity. Since I do a lot of black and white photography, harsh shadows don't bother me. So going out and finding some interesting mud tiles that have some interesting shadows and light happening on them with small things like plants or little details like the salt crystals that you can find on the salt playas in Death Valley. That's another example of where you can easily create your own shade with a 24-inch reflector diffuser. And then you can photograph plants and salt crystals and other little macro details all day long. So I had absolutely no problem finding things to photograph on completely clear days. And then around sunrise and sunset, even if there aren't any clouds, some of those landforms, especially on clear days, just have a tremendous glow, say around 20 minutes before sunrise or 20 minutes after sunset. So things like badlands and mountains and sand dunes can look amazing even on cloudless days.
You do a lot of black and white work, and I think your black and white work is fantastic. I made a personal decision a few years back for business reasons to completely exclude black and white from my portfolio. My portfolio is very much dominated by color, and every now and then I would produce a black and white image and I'd throw it up on my website. And for some reason, it would just seem to stick out like a sore thumb. And so I decided, you know what, it's going to be all color all the time. And I feel that you've embraced black and white. You've kind of done it without any fear. But do you think that the black and white images you have are less noticed by people in the online community? Do you think that there's a penalty for shooting black and white, or do you feel like there's a lot of people out there that really appreciate what you're doing?
Well, I think that one of the best things that I did was separate my black and white work. So like on Instagram, I have a black and white portfolio or a profile that's just black and white versus just color, because I think that is extremely clever. Yeah, it's just two completely different groups of people that resonate. So there's some overlap, but so my black and white work, I feel like is some of my favorite photography of my own. And it's some of the stuff that I enjoy doing the most. So making the kind of decision that you did, I can totally understand for business reasons why you would make that kind of decision. For me, though, I feel like it's something that I feel like I'm almost better at black and white photography than I am at color work. So by not showcasing it, I would be missing a huge part of who I am as a photographer. I feel like my color work, I'm able to do the things like focus on grace and elegance and harmony and really soft pastel colors. And then I'm able to do really bold, aggressive, dramatic work with my black and white photography that I don't feel like I can with my color. So for me, it's felt like I have to do both, but knowing that the audience for both, or that there's a different audience for each of those pursuits. Now, I was just going to ask you, do you feel like by making that decision, you're missing out on opportunities to express yourself? Or do you feel like, yeah, color is how I best express myself, and you're not really feeling like you're missing out?
Well, I mostly feel like a wimp for not having the courage to just throw up whatever I feel like putting up. But but yeah, it's interesting. Black and white definitely is a different approach, and I feel like I'm color oriented. Like every now and then I will convert something to black and white, but I never really quite feel like it's my thing. And the way you phrase that you feel like you can be more bold and aggressive with your black and white work than you can with your color work, that really struck me. It's kind of interesting. I mean, I do feel like they are different approaches, but I'm curious as to why you think that your approach to color is so different from your approach to black and white.
I feel like I just, like when I look at colors of my own work where they're really, really strong, I just feel like I don't do that well. I don't know if it's just something about how I see colors or like my processing skills are too limited. So I just feel like I can express those bolder scenes better when color is removed. Like when I think about color landscape photography and people who do aggressive, bolder compositions really well, you're one of the people that I think about. But I can't present color work in that same way. I think it possibly is also because I just don't like really bold, aggressive colors. When I think about what my house looks like, the types of clothes I wear, like I like a very particular set of colors. Or when fall colors, when you have a really bold pink sky compared to a much warmer, so say a cool tone sky with a warmer landscape because of the autumn colors, like that's just something that I just don't feel like that doesn't go with, or it doesn't work with my brain. Whereas if you strip the color out, then you can really focus on the tones and emphasize the composition in a way that I feel like I just can't with color work. So when I look at your work, actually, it's one of the things that I wish I could do better, because I feel like you're really good at doing the bold, really bold, more aggressive compositions with color. And I just haven't, that's just doesn't work as well for me. So it's interesting that like I think of you as being so successful in that area. Because I feel like you have a skill at processing color, I think, that I don't.
Yeah, and but like what you said earlier about with big landscapes, like the weather conditions and the color that's in the sky is so important, and I think that's really critical to doing bold, aggressive color landscapes, wide-angle landscapes. So I spent a lot of time waiting for those perfect, really dramatic, colorful skies, and they don't really happen that often. And so, maybe it's a patience thing, though I've always felt like I don't have any patience, and that it really hampers my ability to make the types of photographs that I sometimes want to make. But it's certainly, it's really interesting to hear you say that. And, thank you for the kind words, because I've always felt like I struggle with the big, bold landscape. And it's something that doesn't come intuitively to me. And the irony is, because I've staked a claim as a landscape photographer since, I first turned pro, even before that when I was still doing this part-time. But I've always felt that the thing that I'm best at is street photography, and specifically black and white street photography. So
that's really interesting. Like, yeah. I already sent you a note about this, but your conversation with Kurt, so your the discussion that I think he was or maybe 2 interviews ago. But you telling him that the same thing that you just told me, I find that so surprising, because when I look at your work, it seems like that comes so intuitively to you. So, and it seems like like you say you don't have the patience, but it seems like you're able to consistently present work that has those bold, aggressive compositions with color treated, that's as bold but treated really naturally, and that it seems like it just comes so easily to you. And that's my perception as somebody that, like, I see all of your photography, and obviously we've spent a little bit of time together, but it's just interesting that you say that that's something that is a struggle for you when it just appears so natural. And then something like black and white street photography is something that comes really naturally to you, but it's not something that's you're known for at all.
It's not something I even enjoy doing. I mean, I started doing it a few years ago because whenever I was home, I would be chomping at the bit to get back out and do photography. And I've never had the luxury of living in a beautiful place like you do. So I'm, always in places like Minneapolis or Washington, D.C. or other places. And, there's certainly some nice landscape opportunities relatively close to these cities, but they're not really in that stand-up beautiful scenery. And so I'd be home for long stretches in between trips. And I just finally said, you know what, I'm going to head into the city and do some street photography. And I've always been really uncomfortable with it, but I found that it came to me in a much more intuitive way. And I often struggle with landscapes. And I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear people like you and I talking about our struggles and how difficult we find this to be, because I think a lot of people feel like this is very difficult for them as well. And I guess the message that we're conveying to them is it's difficult for us too. And as long as you keep at it and you keep trying to push yourself in new directions, you'll eventually start moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really important lesson. And that when I think about my work, so I was doing consulting work with nonprofits and foundations and feel like it was just so easy. Like I had that it just success came so quickly with me for that. And now I compare it to my nature photography work. And I think that's one of the things that's kept me engaged is because it's really hard. I was looking at my photos from the Mesquite Dunes in Death Valley, and I've been there 15 to 20 times. And I feel like I'm only finally happy with my photos from that place. So while I think a lot of photographers, social media just requires that you present the best, that you're living your best life. But a lot of people that I know that do this full time go through these ups and downs, lack of confidence, self-doubt, and that it's just part of the process, and that being able to push through it over and over and over again. Eventually, years later, you'll have a portfolio of work that you're proud of. And I know that for some people, photography probably comes really naturally and isn't as hard. But for people that do struggle with some of the creative process and some of the aspects of building a portfolio, that just a lot of work over time, that I think that and learning from a lot of those failures and experimentation and just figuring out what works for you, that over time, it really does lead to some creative breakthroughs.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't understand that this really does require a lot of work and a lot of effort, that there are many times where you're out in the field for days or weeks where you're just not really getting it coming together. Either the conditions aren't right or you're in a bit of a creative rut. I mean, I've certainly had trips where the problem wasn't the weather or the scenery. The problem was me. I just wasn't in the moment. I wasn't present. And, what you said about going to the dunes in Death Valley, 15, 20 times and really finally just hitting your stride. I feel that way with a lot of trips as well. If you're not doing that really aggressive photo manipulation where you're just, creating the landscape that you wanted to photograph back home on the computer, if you're choosing a path that's a little bit more truer to the traditional photographic process, this can be a very long-term process for people. Yes. And it really has to be a passion. It really has to be something that you love. You can't just expect great results right away. It's a lifetime of work.
Exactly. And you have to like being outside and just spending a lot of time like trudging through sand dunes and like walking up rocky alluvial fans to canyons during the middle of the day, hoping that you'll find something interesting. And if that part isn't there, then like for me, that's one of the things that drives me, that I'm just fascinated by nature and absolutely love seeing new places, revisiting old places, and then just pushing myself to improve my ability to create photos that tell stories about those places. And that's the kind of challenge that really has kept me engaged. I think if it was easy, I probably would have just been like, okay, been there, done that. I've been successful at this. It's not that interesting anymore. But the fact that there's so little that you can control with weather and with seasonal changes, and that you can put yourself in the right place at the right time and have the skills to deliver, but things just don't come together all the time. So for me, it's definitely been like lots of ups and downs, but my love for nature is what keeps me interested and moving forward. And just the desire to have some of these breakthroughs where it's like, yeah, I've visited this place so many times and finally feel like I have something that I'm really proud of and that I've put in the work, and that almost makes the results feel more exciting to me.
So what's the craziest thing that's ever happened to you in the field?
Craziest thing? Oh my gosh, I feel so boring. I can't think of a single example.
Well,
I have a little example.
Okay, go for it.
It's not crazy though. It's more like just bad decision making. Ron and I used to travel around in a RAV4, so because we could fold down the seats and sleep in the back and pretty much stay anywhere we wanted. So we were at the Alvord Playa, which is in southeastern Oregon, and it was 0 degrees outside. So the playa was completely frozen, and it's a place where you're allowed to drive. So we drove out onto the playa for sunrise, thinking we would be able to find an interesting spot for what looked like was going to be a beautiful sunrise. Well, a hot spring runs through the playa, but was covered in snow. So because it's warm, it was all mud. We drove right into the hot spring. The car sank and then froze into the playa. So we're 2.5 hours from the nearest town, and we have to convince a tow truck driver to come out and get us on the playa that we're stuck in, and frozen in at this point. So that's just the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, didn't think about the fact that a hot spring would be crossing a playa and that we'd get stuck in 0 degree weather. So we spent a couple nights out there waiting for everything to come together and finally got out. But so that's a kind of bad decision making, interesting story. The photo that goes along with it, which I can send you to include, makes it look pretty dramatic. We tried to dig ourselves out and made an even bigger mess. We had to drive home to Denver at like 55 miles an hour because there was so much mud all over the undercarriage of the car. So didn't get any photos. Whole trip was a mess. But so that's a kind of like very, very mildly crazy type of situation.
Yeah, that's pretty good. How much did it cost?
Oh my gosh. Like I wanted to negotiate with the tow truck driver. How much do you think it cost?
I'm going to guess that it cost $2,000.
Oh no, $1,200. So
okay, and, the funny thing, I was going to say $1,200, and I'm like, no, I'm lowballing it. Let me go up to $2,000. It would have been so brilliant if I had said $1,200.
It would have been brilliant. But so Ron was talking to the guy who was again many hours away, and I'm like, negotiate with him. Like there is no way we are paying $1,200. And Ron's like, we have no negotiating power in this situation. We have to get him here, and then we have to convince him to drive out onto this playa where we're completely stuck because a local guy had tried to pull us out. And so that was fun. We had all of our supplies and everything, so there was no danger, but it wasn't terribly pleasant.
I have learned the hard way that when you're in an area like that where there's a risk you might get stuck somewhere, the first thing you do is you find the guy in town who's in charge of towing people out of crazy places, make friends with him, take him out to dinner, buy him a case of beer, and have him on speed dial. I've got in Hanksville, Utah, I've got one guy who operates a tow service who, like, the last time I was there, it rained, so everything turned to like this horrible slick mud. And I think I called him twice for tows in the span of one day. So he was enjoying my stay in Hanksville.
Yeah, I think I need your number in Hanksville because we spend some time out there too, and those roads do get really, really nasty.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like they cease being roads and they just turn into this sticky clay mud that is just the absolute worst. So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'll definitely hook you up. So, you're spending a lot of time on the road in an RV with your husband. Uh-huh. So how does that work? Or more to the point, are there times where you just want to kill each other? How do you manage that?
We get this question so often, and we never want to kill each other. Like, I guess we're just really lucky. I think just get along really well. We don't have a lot of conflicts about things. We live pretty similar styles, so and our photography interests are very similar. So the fact that we both have a high level of obsession around photography, I think that really helps because we both are interested in the same landscapes. We're both interested in similar weather. So we can go do those things together where we'll do a hike together and then we'll separate and do our own photography and then come back together. And then we work perfectly fine. Like I'll do my photography work and Ron will do his, he's a software engineer and he'll do his work. We sit at a little dinette that's 4 feet by 3 feet, the table, and we're fine. We've never had a problem. I think it helps that we had a solid relationship going into living together in that kind of situation. We sold our house in Denver, I think in 2015 or 2016, and moved into our trailer full time for about a year and a half. So we actually lived just in our Airstream for a full year and a half, and maybe had one or two major arguments during that time. So, it just, and when we do have a big argument, there's really nowhere to go because it's only 25 feet long. But
I just imagine you guys getting into a fight and both of you on opposite on the opposite ends of this 25-foot RV. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to resolve things pretty quickly when there's nowhere to go. I actually feel like it's brought us a lot closer because we have shared all these fantastic experiences together. We've had our Airstream for 5 years now, and we've been to all sorts of places, and we've been able to stay in places for really long periods of time, which is something that we hadn't been able to do before. So as long as we have an internet connection, we're both able to work, and it's worked out really well. So from my perspective, it hasn't been a problem because we just get along well enough to make it work. And we have friends who, like Alex Noriega and his girlfriend Taylor, they live together full time in their RV, or David Kingham and Jennifer Renwick. We spend a lot of time with them, and they're full-time photographers and full-time RVers. So a lot of people can make it work really well.
I'm going to ask one final question before we break up the conversation. Okay. If you were to be sitting down right now with an amateur photographer, an enthusiast who is really trying to get better at the art and craft of photography, what is the one piece of advice, the best advice you can give them for getting better as a photographer?
So I'll give one piece of advice and then one lesson that really helped me. I think my main piece of advice is just spend a lot of time doing it and try a lot of different things without fear of failure and without fear of other people judging you. Just really spending a lot of time outside with your camera to get a sense of what you enjoy the most and just to really learn the technical essentials and then work on the creative process. So I think that would probably be my piece of more universal advice. The other thing that worked really well for me that I feel like was probably the best year and a half that I've spent with my photography. There's a photographer here in Colorado. His name is Cole Thompson, and he focuses almost exclusively on black and white photography. And he has this practice called photo celibacy, which essentially means that he doesn't spend a lot of time or any time at all looking at other people's photographs because those ideas have gotten too imprinted on his mind. And that he wanted the room to find his own vision. So I heard him speak near the beginning of my photography journey. I went to a camera club with some friends and heard him talking about that practice. And at the time, it didn't resonate with me. But a couple of years later, after feeling like I'm doing what I'm seeing online, and it's just not resonating with me. Like I'm not getting out of this what I'm looking for. I pretty much stopped looking at social media. I stopped following other photographers, except for my friends, and I stopped looking up photos of places before I visited them. And so that practice of kind of modified photographic celibacy, I don't do it nearly as seriously as Cole Thompson does. But I feel like that was one of the key things that for me really helped me find my own voice and feel a lot more confident with my path. So that's the time when I really started spending more time on intimate landscapes and small scenes and plants and other things that fascinated me. So I know when I talk about this, I get so many blank looks or people that tell me outright, like, you're crazy. Like, I could never do that. I don't want to do that. It sounds insane. But that was something that helped me so much. So photo celibacy really, really helped me out.
It has been an extreme pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, Ian, this was great. It was really fun to have this conversation, and thanks so much for inviting me to talk with you.
Well, we hope to hear from you again and see much more of you. Thank you very much, Sarah. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ian.
Landscape photography isn't just about taking pictures of beautiful scenery. It's about telling the story of the landscape, and it's about telling your story as an artist. I'm professional photographer Ian Plant, and my courses are designed to give you the technical skills that you need to succeed and to help develop your own personal creative vision. So, are you ready to share your story with the world?